Hello and welcome. I'm excited to introduce our panel discussion today. We are Tanenbaum, the Center for Interreligious Understanding, and our mission is to promote justice and build respect for religious difference by transforming individuals and institutions to reduce prejudice, hatred, and violence. I am our manager, Melinda Zalma, our manager of programs, and I will leave, Maria will go into a little bit more about the connection between our mission and our healthcare program. But I did want to mention our other program areas: peace building, education, and workplace. Our peace building program supports religiously motivated actors around the world in conflict and post-conflict areas. And our education department gives tools and curricula and trainings in K through 12 educational spaces to parents, to teachers, and to students to create inclusive, religiously inclusive and inclusive in general classrooms and school communities. Our workplace program works with corporations, large nonprofits, and government agencies through trainings and webinars, education, and resources and major events to bring tools for navigating religious difference in the workplace. Our webinar today is about conscientious care, and we mean that about taking care of our patients, creating patient-centered care, particularly by understanding their religious needs and seeking out to understand the religious needs. We have published the medical manual for Religio-Cultural Competence, in which we've explored different religions and their relationship to healthcare, and we're excited that we just completed our chapter on the Bahá'í Faith, and we'll be discussing that in particular today. So Maria McQuaid, our Senior Healthcare Program Associate, will be leading the discussion along with Dr. Sina Firouzi. Maria McQuaid, as I said, is our Senior Healthcare Program Associate. She's been with us for 4 years, and prior to Tanenbaum, she worked as a case aid assistant with International Institute of Buffalo, a refugee resettlement program. She received her master's in medical anthropology from the University at Buffalo and her bachelor's in international studies with concentrations in peace and conflict resolution and international development from American University. Dr. Sina Firouzi, who is a member of the Baha'i community and a board-certified family medicine physician, who's currently working at One Medical. He is also an Ayurvedic health practitioner, which is an ancient healing medicine from India, which employs natural health care healing approaches. He currently serves on the board of directors of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. So with that, I will turn it over to Maria and Sina for our program.
Thank you so much, Melinda. As Melinda said, I'm Maria. I'm the Senior Healthcare Program Associate. I just want to welcome everyone to our virtual session on the basics of Baha'i. This is the first part of our Conscientious Care webinar series. We are hosting this webinar series to launch the new chapter of our medical manual for Religio-Cultural Competence, which covers Baha'i beliefs and practices as they intersect with patient care. Although this new chapter is far from comprehensive, it does offer significant background information and context that can better prepare you when you interact with Baha'i patients and their families. So as Melinda said, I am joined today by Sina Firouzi, one of our proofreaders for this chapter, and he has graciously agreed to have a brief conversation with me about Baha'i practices and regarding his relationship to the Baha'i faith. So thank you so much for joining us, Sina.
Thank you so much, Maria. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so just to get the conversation kicked off, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship to the Baha'i faith?
Sure. And before we begin, I'll just make a note that I'm not here as an official representative of the Baha'i faith or any organization, and just sharing my own personal thoughts and viewpoints. But I am a Baha'i. I believe in the tenets and principles of the Baha'i faith, and I try my best to follow the teachings and the guidance in my day-to-day life. I do participate in various Baha'i activities, and there is a lot of emphasis on any activities that will provide spiritual upliftment, development of societies. So whether it's we have devotional gatherings that are open to everyone, children classes, junior youth groups, study circles, and so on. And so I try to involve myself with all of these as well as other activities.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. So how does it impact the work that you do? Because you are a family medicine practitioner with One Medical. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, just in general, Baha'is believe that work that is done in a spirit of service and in love is in a sense a kind of worship. And so that's basically how I view my work. And it's a connection, I think, with God. And there's a strong emphasis in the Baha'i faith on the oneness of humanity. And so I try to apply that principle in my interactions with others. And I think a very simple example of that is with the Golden Rule, which you see in one form or another in all the religions. And
yeah, thank you. That's funny. I'm actually going to be touching on that topic a little bit in my presentation. So thank you for introducing it. So my next question is, how has the Baha'i faith shaped how you think about healthcare?
Well, I think the faith provides a holistic approach to healthcare, both in terms of the greater society as well as the individual. So when you look at the greater society, at the world as a whole, there's a quotation in the Baha'i writings that gives the example of the whole world being like the human body. And if there's a disease or ailment in one part of the body, that it has some impact on the whole. So in like manner, the health of the society around us is important for each individual person's health. And so it's really important that we meet everybody's needs. As far as the individual goes, while the Baha'i faith does endorse all forms of medical and surgical treatment when recommended by a competent physician, there's also it is also taught that we'll probably use foods and herbs in the future and not probably as much medication. So this is probably part of the reason why I ended up studying Ayurveda, which was already mentioned earlier, traditional Indian medicine. And I just see some kind of consistency in the approach. And in addition to that, there's this interrelatedness between mind, body, and spirit that's in Ayurveda as well as the Baha'i faith, and how all these different things can impact each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed learning a lot about the Baha'i faith. Unfortunately, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to it before working on this chapter with you and our other proofreaders. But I really enjoyed learning more about it and talking to you about it as well. It's very interesting, and there's a lot of good advice. So why do you think it is important for health providers to have this background information before they treat patients with specific religious needs or concerns?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the material in this presentation and the manual in general is super helpful for healthcare providers, just to give better context about various social factors involved in the provision of care. For example, when it comes to Baha'is, they pray and they fast, and these are considered two fundamental pillars of religion, and it's also in many other religions as well. So, prayer is considered as a way to connect with our Creator, to draw closer, to ask for assistance. So, in times of illness, prayer is a tool that is used for help, and oftentimes we pray for each other. And even in the Baha'i faith, it's encouraged for physicians to pray for each patient before they attempt to provide care. So just understanding the importance of prayer and how it can play a significant role in addition to whatever material things we do to provide, to help people heal, prayer plays a significant role. And fasting, which is a symbol of detachment in the Baha'i faith, has, and even though it may have some beneficial effects on the physical body, it's really primarily a way to remember God and a way to learn detachment. And it's important to know this time, at the time of year when Baha'is fast, which is the end of the Baha'i year, the last 19 days, which falls in March, just before the beginning of spring, you might see Baha'is who are fasting. So could this impact the medications they're using? Or are they going to be at high risk for hypoglycemia or other things that need to be kept in mind? So it's just important to be aware of these things. Of course, if someone has a medical reason why they shouldn't be required to fast, it is not required.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will touch on that a little bit more in my slide deck part of the presentation. But thank you for sharing that with us. Have you ever had an experience where religion was a major factor for a patient?
In primary care, we do sometimes see where people may decline certain treatments, or there may be something noted in the chart about blood products, organ donations, certain things they prefer to avoid for various reasons. And of course, some people have views on abortion and contraceptive options. I've never had a experience personally with a patient I can recall that where it was really a major issue during visits we have, our short visits in primary care. But I can certainly imagine in the hospital if there are more serious, complicated health issues, and when you're kind of limited in terms of how you can approach providing care, where it could be I should say more complicated, or need to look for alternative approaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So if there was one thing you wanted people to walk away with after this webinar, what would it be? Either about religion in healthcare, or about the Baha'i faith specifically, or both?
Yeah, I think religion in healthcare is an area where there needs to be a great deal of sensitivity, dealing with very personal issues. I think it's important to be careful about, for the providers, to avoid making judgments, and just to recognize that everybody has different beliefs, and those beliefs can also change over time. And the more that we're able to accept and really respect those different differences, I think that patients will be more open, and the care we provide will be better in the end overall. As far as the Baha'i faith in general, I would say that, one take-home message would be that it focuses on unity. We refer in the Baha'i faith as to three onenesses: the oneness of God, oneness of religion, and oneness of humanity. And so I would say that kind of is the one take-home message that I would share.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that with us and making the time to speak with me today. That kind of concludes the discussion part of the webinar, and I will kind of transition into the slide deck, which gets into more of the specifics that you'll be seeing in the actual Baha'i chapter that will be available in our medical manual for Religio-Cultural Competence. Sina will be sticking around to the end to answer questions with me. So if that's okay with everyone, we'll just leave questions to the end. All right, and Alana, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so Melinda already touched on this, but I just want to say a little bit about Tanenbaum before we start. Tanenbaum Center for Interreligious Awareness. It is our mission to promote justice and build respect for people of all religious faiths and none by dismantling prejudice, hate, and violence. Within the healthcare program, that means respecting patients' beliefs and practices as it relates to their care. With this goal in mind, we work with hospitals, education programs, and health systems to ensure that patients of all religious beliefs and none receive religio-culturally competent care. You can go to the next slide. Oh, and the next one. Okay. So I want to thank our funder for this chapter, the Wayfarer Foundation. They were nice enough to fund this new chapter, which we add to the medical manual for Religio-Cultural Competence, which was originally published in 2009. It was vetted by experts in religion and medicine, and it details how religious traditions and practices affect medical decisions in 10 major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Shinto, traditional Chinese, American Indian and Alaskan Natives, and Afro-Caribbean traditions. So now our medical manual will cover 11 traditions, which will include the Baha'i faith. Okay, so the information in this manual and in this new chapter is offered keeping in mind that there are almost infinite denominations and variations of religious traditions throughout the world, and religion is essentially a very subjective practice that can change from person to person. There is tremendous diversity between religious traditions, but also within religious traditions, and it's impossible to know everything there is to know about every belief and practice. Okay. So in order to be a good healthcare provider or health worker, you do not need to be an expert on every religion. Instead, we have identified 15 areas within the patient care experience where religion and or spirituality can become salient for the patient and or their family. Being able to identify these areas can help to prepare you to deal with potential challenges and better address patient needs and concerns. So these 15 areas of patient care, what we call trigger topics, appear on this slide. Unfortunately, we will not be able to cover all of them in this presentation, but we do provide information for each trigger topic in the medical manual, which is available through our website, tanenbaum.org, and through Amazon. Before we get into the different trigger topics and Baha'i beliefs and practices, I just want to note again that religion is a very personal experience and practice, and the information we provide is given for background and context. This information should be used to develop generalizations rather than stereotypes, which we define as fixed thinking. Generalizations are what we use to categorize and process the overwhelming amount of information that we are exposed to on a daily basis. In a fast-paced and confusing world, and even more so in fast-paced, high-pressure environments like hospitals and healthcare spaces, our brain creates these necessary shortcuts to break down and process information. This natural process of breaking down new information into manageable categories is necessary and can be very helpful, but it can also be dangerous if it's misused. I like to think of it as the beginning of a conversation versus the end of a conversation. Generalizations can be used to engage with the patient and the family and can prepare you when when situations arise. Whereas if generalizations devolve into stereotypes, you are no longer engaging the patient, you are essentially ending the conversation before it even has a chance to begin. Okay. So in order to understand the impact that religion has on healthcare decisions and patient-centered care, the concept of religion should be properly defined. For this session, we'll recognize religion as being composed of three elements: culture, belief, and practice. This is not a theological definition, but we like to think of it as a useful way of understanding the way religion functions in healthcare spaces. So these three components are all interwoven and they each influence each other. And sometimes it's hard to tell what is belief, what is culture, and what is practice. But culture is defined as the values, norms, and traditions of a particular group. In other words, culture is the unwritten rules that shape our perception of things and often determine how we interact with the world around us. For example, a Somali Muslim woman may be more comfortable with a provider of the same gender because that is her cultural interpretation of her religious beliefs. Belief is the conviction of the truth of some statement or the reality of some being or phenomenon. It is what we know to be fundamentally true, and it is unique to each individual. So belief is the conviction of the truth of some statement of the reality. Belief is often influenced by religious doctrine, but the interpretation of that doctrine is unique to the individual. For example, a patient may view prayer as an essential part of their treatment, or a patient may even want to rely on prayer in lieu of certain medical treatments or procedures. And finally, we have practice, which is a repeated or customary action that is seen as the habitual way of doing something. For example, a patient may wish to alter a medication regimen to observe a religious fast day, as Dr. Firouzi noted. Again, religious practices are often influenced by a combination of cultural and religious beliefs, and some traditions require more practice or more activities than others. Okay, so this is just a visual representation of this working definition that I was talking about. It illustrates the way that we each balance these things, and each patient will fall somewhere on this Venn diagram, but each patient is going to fall in a different location. Religiosity is not something that is often visible to others, but just because it's not visible doesn't mean it's not important or influential in our lives. That is why it's vital to ask patients about their religious beliefs rather than making assumptions based on their outward appearances. So how we understand people with whom we interact is a combination of what we know about a person's background or what we think we know, and our own cultural or religious lens, the perspective that we're bringing into the situation. So in other words, our own religiosity shapes how we view and interpret the religiosity of others. Our own religiosity can also directly influence how we define religion and what we define as religious beliefs and practices. Okay, so now we can dig into the core of this presentation, which is the Baha'i Faith. Just a little bit of background information for those of you that may not be familiar with it. The Baha'i Faith is an independent world religion that traces its origins back to 19th century Persia, now called Iran. Baha'is are followers of Baha'u'llah. I'm pronouncing that correctly? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Meaning glory of God, whom they understand to be the most recent in a series of divine messengers sent by God to give the spiritual and moral teachings by which humanity can advance. So these messengers, known as manifestations of God, have included Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad. Baha'u'llah taught that the religions of the world come from the same source and are essentially successive chapters in one evolving religion. So currently within the United States, there are an estimated 175,000 Baha'is living across the country, with the largest concentrations in Los Angeles, California, Palm Beach, Florida, Harris County, Texas, and Cook County, Illinois. Also a fun fact, it is the second largest religion in South Carolina. So although Baha'i practitioners can be traced back to the mid-19th century in the United States, they experienced a period of significant growth during the 19th century civil rights movement, where many people were inspired by the fundamental values of Baha'i, including the oneness of humanity and embracing pluralism and diversity, like Sina mentioned during our discussion. Okay, so taking a brief look again at our trigger topics, we will now cover more specific beliefs and practices associated with the Baha'i Faith. Our first topic is hygiene, which refers to religious practices related to washing prior to prayers and mealtimes, or religious concerns pertaining to grooming needs. So a Baha'i patient and or their family member of the patient may want to cleanse themselves before prayer, a customary practice called ablution, which also appears in a lot of other religious traditions. As such, it is important to have a designated space, a clean space provided for people to wash their hands and face. Our next topic is dietary concerns, which refers to religiously motivated food restrictions that impact meals or medication. So something to take into consideration for Baha'i patients is the practice of fasting that occurs during the festival of Nowruz, a celebration at the end of the year that celebrates the new year. That's correct, right? Yes. Okay, good. So it's a celebration of the new year that coincides with the spring equinox. The fast is observed from sunrise to sunset over the course of 19 days. In 2022, the celebration and associated fast will take place March 2nd to March 20th. So in this situation, it is important to make accommodations, although exceptions can be made in certain circumstances. For example, if a patient is sick, pregnant, menstruating, or engaging in rigorous travel or heavy labor. Okay, our next consideration involves organ transplants and donations, which is viewed favorably, and for those donating, it is even considered commendable within the Baha'i Faith. It is important, however, that the body of the donor be treated with dignity and respect. I will touch a little bit on end-of-life care beliefs and practices later on in the presentation. Okay, in terms of reproductive health and family planning, which includes religious views on contraception, abortion, or fertility procedures such as IVF or sterilization, many Baha'i believe that the primary function of marriage is procreating, and married couples are expected to have children. So contraception is permitted for people who already have children or are planning to have children in the future, but is not recommended that it be used to avoid procreation entirely. Of course, exceptions are made for people who have medical issues, specifically in situations where pregnancy would be dangerous for them or for the baby. Okay, the pregnancy and birth trigger topic refers to religion-specific practices associated with labor and birth, such as particular foods, rituals, and/or traditional remedies. So within the Baha'i tradition, new parents may want to recite prayers with their newborn. So it is important to give this family space to pray and to bond. It is also important to note that most Baha'i believe life begins at conception. Therefore, in stillbirth situations, the child should be treated with the respect and dignity that would be given to any newborn child. Okay, and lastly, we have end-of-life care, which includes religious beliefs around performing particular rituals before or after death that dictate particular perspectives on withdrawing care or prolonging life. So within the Baha'i Faith, it is important that the body of the person be buried without delay. Cremation and embalming are not usually permitted, but there is no formal policy on euthanasia. So it is important to discuss all options with the patients and/or their family. Okay, and I just want to highlight again that each patient is going to be unique, and therefore their interpretation and practice are going to be unique. And it's important that everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Again, I just want to highlight that generalizations can be helpful, but they are harmful if they devolve into stereotypes. So it's important to be conscious, to be aware of the generalizations that we're bringing into the situation, the lens, the perspective that we're bringing into the situation, to understand how we are viewing things and how that determines how we interact and treat the patient. So as Sina mentioned earlier, the golden rule is a great idea, but at Tanenbaum, we actually suggest you follow the platinum rule, and that is treat others the way they want to be treated. And if you are unsure about the way somebody wants to be treated, you just ask them respectfully, of course. Okay, so now we will open it up to questions. There should be a Q&A chat bar, so questions can be shared in that, and then I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have, or if I can't answer that, then Sina is also here to help me out. Well, if you think of any questions later, feel free to reach out to myself or my colleague, Alana Lehman. You can reach us at healthcare@tanenbaum.org. We will be making the slide deck available to everyone. The new chapter that is part of the medical manual now is available on our website. It will soon be available on Amazon, but the Baha'i chapter is not available through that platform yet. If you are interested in any other information, again, please reach out. We have a lot of other resources. Alana, could you go back to the resource page quickly? Thank you. Okay, perfect. So we have a lot of other resources in addition to the medical manual for Religio-Cultural Competence. We also have 3 different curricula that are available free through our website. We have a curricula for nursing students. We have a curricula for residency. We have a curricula for medical students as well, and they cover a lot of the topics that I touched on throughout my presentation. And we also have online learning available. We have a series of 3 modules that touch on the way that conscience functions in healthcare situations, both for patients, providers, and the institution. And then we have what we call our sim clinic, which is a simulated patient experience that the person can kind of work through on their own. And it's meant to reflect what a real conversation would be like with a patient who has specific religious concerns or needs. So that can also just be fun to check out. All right, well, if there are, yes, so we are also recording this session, so it will be available online, probably within the next week or so.
I have a question, actually.
Yes, Alana.
Dr. Firouzi, if you wouldn't mind, I'm just curious how COVID and the pandemic has impacted like the Baha'i community or like your patients that you've seen or your practice, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. I guess there's a lot to answer with how the impacts have been. Obviously, it's had major impacts for everybody in different ways. For the Baha'i community, it's changed how we hold a lot of our functions, obviously with going online more, which has in some ways been very beneficial and And just like in other areas, I think in some ways, I don't know if we'll necessarily need to go back to a lot of the in-person. So there's been some benefit as well as some downsides. As far as patient care, I kind of transitioned over to One Medical close to the start of the pandemic. And as far as patients coming in, I mean, there was a significant drop off. Everybody was holding off coming into the clinics. Of course, they wanted to avoid potential exposures. And then when I moved over to One Medical, we had, finally got the tests available, and actually we had tests available even before that point. But things have just generally picked up gradually over time. And fortunately, in Southern California, it hasn't been so bad. At least relatively recently compared to other parts of the country. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else more specific I could address than what you probably already would expect. But is there anything more specific about that?
No, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Sure.
We do have another question. So we have a question. Since Baha'i believe that life begins at conception, should doctors refrain from recommending IUDs since they do not prevent conception, only implantation? Dr. Firouzi, do you want to answer this question?
I'm okay to answer it. If you'd like to answer it, Maria, that's okay too.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So yeah, thanks for the question. The IUDs are thought to some degree to potentially also prevent conception, but there's definitely an effect on implantation as well. So it's potentially not an ideal option. I'm not certain if there's any official guidance specifically about the IUDs, but as far as I understand, it wouldn't be an ideal option. But it's a little hard because there are other types of birth control that might also do the same thing. They may prevent, focus primarily on preventing conception, but also potentially prevent implantation. And so there is a lot that needs to be determined still, and it hasn't. We don't have as much formal guidance as maybe everybody would like to have. So a lot of things are still left up to individual interpretation and what they think falls within the general guidance that's provided, considering that life starts at conception. So I'm not sure if that helps. And Maria might actually, if you have some additional information, please feel free to share.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. Thank you for sharing. I think this is a great question. In these kind of situations where it really is up to the discretion of the patient, I would suggest obviously having a conversation with them. If it's something that they're not comfortable with, then exploring all the alternatives that are available is probably the best option. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up today? Okay, well, I just want to thank all of our proofreaders for this chapter. Again, I want to thank the Wayfarer Foundation for supporting this chapter. And again, our proofreaders spent a great deal of time and effort working on this. I know some of you are on the call today, so I just, again, want to say thank you. We really appreciate your help with this, and we are really excited to share this chapter with everyone.